looking at week 17, day 1. We have 6/8 minus 2/6. Remember, I have to find the least common denominator before I can subtract, because my denominators have to be the same. So what I did was I took 6/8 and I looked at the denominator, which is 8, and I'm looking at 2/6, so I have 6, and I ran through my factors for each one. Not my factors, I'm sorry, my multiples for each one. So 8's multiples, if I would have 8, 16, 24, and I stopped at 24 because I knew that 6 had a multiple of 24 as well. So I went through 6, 12, 18, 24. So now I know that 8 times 3 will give me 24, and 6 times 4 would give me 24. So I have to multiply each of these fractions by that same factor that would give me 24. So 6/8 I multiplied it times 3/3, and I got 18 24ths. So then I took 2/6 next. 2/6 times 4/4 would give me 8 24ths. So now I can rewrite my problem, and I have 18 24ths, which I got from here, and 8 24ths subtracted by 8 24ths, and that would give me 10 24ths, but I can't leave that, so I need to reduce it. And what number can go into both 10 and 24? It would be 2. So if I divide 10 by 2, I get 5, and 24 by 2, I get 12. Number 2, create an equivalent fraction for each. I multiplied the top one and I divided the bottom. So the top fraction I multiplied by 2 halves, and I got 6 24ths. So 15 tenths, if I divide it by 5, I would get 5 fifths, I'm sorry, I would get 3 halves. And 24 36, I would get 2/3 if I divided it by 12. You can have a multiple of answers there, and they would still be correct as long as you multiply the top and bottom by the same number, and the bottom number were divisible, I'm sorry, and the last thing that you could do is divide. So both of these would have to be divisible by the same number as well, and you have to do whatever you do to the top, you do to the bottom. Okay? Just remember that. All right, number 3, use a model to find the product of 1/2 times 3/5. Let me get some focus in on here. Just need to focus it in a little bit better. 1 second. All right, so I have the model, and for 1/2, I have 1 column, 2 columns, 2 columns because my denominator is 2. I kept 1 because I have 1 at the top of my numerator. So I went on and shaded in an entire column of 1. My next fraction is 3/5, so I have 5 rows. I have 3 as my numerator, so I'm keeping 3 of these, and I'm only going to look at where they overlap. So they only overlap in 3 places. So then my fraction would be 3 out of 10 total. So 3 tenths is my fraction. I could check that with multiplying, with just computation. If I multiply 3 times 1, I get 3, and 2 times 5, I get 10. So my fractions do check out. Adding 5, 6, and 5/8. Again, I'm using those same denominators of 6 and 8. My factoring, multiplying I should say, not factoring, but my multiples are 6, 12, 18, and 24. 8, 16, and 24 here. So I multiplied 5, 6 times 4/4 to give me 20 24ths. So I rewrote it here. And then I took 5/8, multiplied it by 3/3, and I got 15 24ths. So now I can add 20 24ths and 15 24ths, and that gives me 35 24ths. It's an improper fraction, or kids, we call it fat cowboy. So then you divide out, you have 1 whole and 11 24ths. It says list 6 multiples of 6, not including 6, I would have 12, 24, 30, 36, 42, and 48. For 8, if I were not to include 8, I would get 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, and 56. What multiples are common for 6 and 8? It would be 24 and 48. And what is the smallest multiple they have in common? It would be 24. Remember, again, I'm not talking about factors, I'm talking about multiples. Okay, day 2, The weight of Uncle Mark's shipping box is 3 9/100 pounds. Write the weight of the box as a mixed number. It would be 3 whole and 9 out of 100, which would still be 9 1/100. Okay, number 2 says explain the divisibility rule for 3. We've had this on our homework several times. Then show how you know that the numbers are divisible. So the digits add up to multiples of 3, and yes, you can do any type of problem here to show me that you know how to prove a divisibility rule that a number is divisible of 3. Here's some more examples right here. So 209 would not be a multiple of 3 or divisible by 3 because when I add these two digits up I get 11 and it's not a multiple. So 372, if I add my digits I get 12. Yes, it's divisible by 3. 476, no, because I would get 17 and it's not a multiple. And 573, yes, because when I add my digits I would get 15. Looking at number 3, comparing the fractions. One quick way is to write out a model just to make sure that you're absolutely correct. Sometimes our models, when we draw them, are not exactly perfect. So another way to look at it is to do cross multiplication. If I multiply 5 times 7, I get 35 over here. And 8 times 4 would give me 32. This number is larger than this number, or smaller, so then my fraction would read 4/5 is less than 7/8. Okay. Number 4, a fraction represents a division problem. The line between the numerator and denominator means divided. So this 6/8 means 6 out of 8, or 6 divided by 8. 6 divided by 8 equals what? So this is using decimals again. I do have to use a little bit of a decimal because remember I cannot divide 8 out of 6. So I need to put a decimal and annex a 0. I annexed 1 0 and I got 8 can go into 60 7 times. So that gave me 56 when I multiplied. Subtract and I get 4. I bring down another 0, annex another 0, and that gives me 40. 8 can go into 45 times. 5 times 8 is 40, so I subtract and I get 0. So my decimal is 75 hundredths. Okay, day 3. Most of you, if you did this or you did not do this, it's fine because I wanted you to do that page in our homework book, in our math book for homework, just so that you could get some extra practice with subtracting fractions while renaming. Okay, so if you want to, you can go ahead and fill this in with me. Miss Gatling drove 400 miles over the holidays. This was 4/5 of the distance that Mrs. Howell drove. Mrs. Newman drove twice as far as Mrs. Howell. How far did Mrs. Newman and Mrs. Howell drive? Well, the first thing I need to figure out is Mrs. Howell, and that's easy because Miss Gatling drove 400 miles over the holidays, and this was 4/5 of the distance Miss Howell drove. So I have some numbers that I can work with. Okay, so I have 320 is what I got. And what I did was I multiplied 400 miles that Miss Gatlin drove times 4/5 is my fraction, and that would give me 16 hundredths. Okay, so let me shade in my 400 a little bit better. You can see that. So that gave me 400 over 1, and then I multiplied. 4 times 4 is 16, and I have 2 zeros. 5 times 1 is 5, so there's my denominator. This is a fat cowboy, so that means that I need to divide. When I divide 5 into 16, I get 3. I'd have 1 left over, so that would be a 10 there. 5 can go into 10 2 times, and then I would have 1 more 0 left over. So Mrs. Hoyle drove 320 miles. Now it also says that Mrs. Newman drove twice as far as Mrs. Hoyle. So that means she went 2 times further than she did. So I'm just going to multiply 320 times 2, and that gives me 640 miles. Number 2, it says use the model below to show the product of 3/4 times 8. Think of 1/4 of 8. So what I did was I took my box and I divided it into fourths, and then I divided it into 8 pieces. Okay? Think of 1/4 of 8. If I had 1/4 of 8, I would have 2 pieces. So if I have 3/4 of 8, I would have 6 pieces. So when I broke this up, I had 4 pieces, and then I broke it up into eighths by drawing a line in between. And as you can see, when I shade my pieces in, I end up getting 6 pieces. 1/4, 3/4 would give me 6 pieces total. How can I prove that? I can write 3/4 times 8 over 1, and I would multiply. 8 times 3 is 24 over 4. 4 can go into 24 6 times. So there's another way to solve it. Okay. Number 3 is division of decimals. I have 61 6/10, which goes in the house, and 7/10, which goes outside of the house. Remember, I cannot divide with the decimals, so I'm going to multiply this times 10, which means I slide my decimal there. Whatever I do there, I have to do over here. So that means I'm multiplying this times 10, which means my number becomes 616 now. So my decimal goes here at the top instead of here. So now I just regularly divide, and that gave me 88 as a whole number. Multiplying with decimals, I can ignore the decimals, go ahead and multiply, and then when I'm done, I have 2 decimal places to account for, so I slide my decimal 2 times, and I get 43 12/100. Okay, 2/3 of 18, I multiply 18 times 2/3, and I get 36 over 3. I have a fat cowboy here, so I'm going to divide. 3 can go into 3 1 time, 3 can go into 6 2 times, so that's 12 is my whole number. Write 2 equivalent fractions. I multiplied times 2 halves and then times 3/3, and I did the same thing there. Day 4. Subtracting with decimals. Remember, you need to annex a 0 because you are going to have to regroup this. Okay, so that's what my regrouping looks like when I subtract. I get 38 51/100. Number 2, I have a 3 and a 4 as my denominator, and I'm adding, not multiplying, so I have to change my denominator. I realize that my multiples have the least common multiple is 12, so I have to multiply 2/3 times 4/4 and 3/4 times 3/3. I rewrite my problem, bringing my whole number with my fraction this time. So I have 7 8/12 plus 5 9/12, and that gives me 12 17/12. This is a fat cowboy, so I have to reduce that. I divide. 17 divided by 12 gives me 1 5/12. So I add my 1 to 12, and that gives me 13 5/12. Okay, number 3, I have 4 and 3 again as a denominator, so I solved for my least common denominator so that I could have common denominators. I have 9/12 here, and I have 8/12 there. I subtract, and that gives me 2 1/12. Okay, out of 120 students, 1/3 play baseball, 1/4 play basketball. How many students play each sport? So I multiply 1/3 times 120 over 1 because I make this into a fraction. And now I have 120 over 3, which is a fat cowboy, so I divide. That gives me 40. 1/4 times 120, I divide that by 4, and that gives me 30. So I have, for baseball, I have 40 students that play baseball and 30 students that play basketball. Now it says how many students aren't playing, so I'm going to subtract the 70 students that are playing from the 120 students total, and I get 50 students that are not playing. Okay, exponents, 4 to the power of 3 is the same as 4 times 4 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16, times 4 is 64. 6 to the power of 2 is 6 times 6, which is 36. 3 to the power of 1 is just 3 by itself, not multiplying it times any other number, so it's just 3. Have a great evening.